um, is this very interesting, strange, complicated dynamic that's emerging in real life, but also very much on social media around the presidential election cycles. I'm watching people who would otherwise be in solidarity with one another now sort of at odds over a presidential election. Do we vote for Kamala Harris? Do we not vote for Kamala Harris? Do we protest Kamala Harris? Do we not? Should we be criticizing protesters who interrupt her speech in Michigan? Should we be frustrated with her for saying I'm speaking and dismissing them as sort of Trumpsters? How do we talk about Black suffering without muting the voice of Palestinian people, and vice versa? There are moments where our interests converge because the systems of power and domination make it such. And then there are moments where a Palestinian might say, and I think will say, maybe even I would argue should say, I can't pull a lever for genocide. My personal choice as a Palestinian is I can't pull this lever for genocide. And there's a Black person who's saying, I understand that. I stand in solidarity with you. I recognize that, but there are a set of issues and concerns and conditions that won't change irrespective on Palestine, irrespective of who's president. But my material conditions will change depending on who the Supreme Court is, depending on what's funded and what's not. And therefore, my decision to choose one of these candidates, and most likely a Democratic candidate, is not because I don't care about Palestine, but because I also have to think about this other thing. And they're being responded to by saying you're pro-genocide, or some of the Palestinians are being accused of being indifferent or maybe even outright anti-Black. And I think that these accusations, these conversations are often too simplistic. They're reductive, they're unnuanced, they're reactionary, and I'm finding them deeply frustrating. But I'm also incredibly worried.
Yeah.
Because so much work has happened to build a solidarity movement that is absolutely essential for our collective liberation. So I know I just said a lot there, but I want to.
It's great. It's great. But like each of your questions, especially in the last, 20 minutes,
I know.
Could have been the whole segment. And I just want to say, like, and I mean, maybe I don't have a YouTube channel. So I don't, and my nerd self was like, well, we could have just picked one of these topics and got into great detail. And so just to share with your audience, like, this is going to leave a lot to be desired.
For sure. And they want her back. And first of all, they're hooked, they're in love. They're like, please bring her back all the time. I'm like, Noura has an open invitation. I know we can't keep her all night. We got to go. But, and some people say they need you to have a YouTube channel. But for sure, I'd love to. I want to know what you're thinking about. I want to know how you're thinking about.
Let me say two things on this. These are huge topics, but I'm going to do a short answer to the first one and then a little bit of an unsatisfying answer to the second one.
Fair enough.
And maybe that's an ongoing conversation that we have.
Yes.
So the short answer to the first one is what is happening, Black Palestine solidarity being destabilized and the lack of reciprocity. I want to just point out that in the heyday of honestly, it was never, historically, I wouldn't call it Black Palestinian solidarity. Historically, I would just describe it as, a Black radical tradition, right? And a Black internationalism that located itself in alignment with people's, colonized peoples and peoples of the third world. So it was in alignment with Cuba, it was alignment with China, it was alignment with the FLN, it was alignment with the PLO. And so it wasn't necessarily a Black Palestine as opposed to Black international.
Right.
And Palestinians happened to be part of this. In 2014, we see what you and I have described as renewals of that and a return, an analytical return to this particular tradition, which had historically been sutured in an anti-imperial struggle, where there was a triangulation between the United States, the African continent, and the Palestinians. That there was this triangulation and an anti-imperialism that sutured these movements, and I think that it still sutures movements, which is also to say that in the present, and this is the point I want to make, whatever we describe as Black Palestine solidarity has never been an identity politics. It's not Black people and Palestinian people. It's been Black radicals and Palestinian radicals that are committed to anti-imperialism as a primary target. It is those, it's not Palestinians, for example, who believe simply that, you know, they want just Palestinian liberation, but understand that Palestinian liberation is embedded in a broader structure that wants to diminish US empire, that wants to diminish all empires, frankly, and wants to continue a tradition that's, you know, captured by Adom Getachew of self-determination that centers anti-capitalism in that kind of project. Not all Black and Palestinian people are anti-imperialists. And so historically, 2014, 2016, 2020, 2021, it has been this radical alliance that really is really the anchor of what I would describe as comprising that, and you know, the Black Palestine solidarity. To the extent that relationships are fractured, 1,000%, and it's heartbreaking to watch. And obviously, some of it is real and some of it is psyop, you know, but it's still heartbreaking. But how much of it is a fracture between our radical bases? That part, you know, is really the question I would ask. Like, how much of it is a fracture of the radical basis, and how much of it was actually built on how much of this analysis was actually grown? You ask a question about reciprocity. I don't, you know, all I want to say is, whatever we do, we're always in debt, especially as, you know, as immigrants in the United States, right? We are eligible for whiteness, you know, even if it's probationary whiteness, right? This is the work of Nadine Neber, Evelyn Sultani, Sarah Galtieri, of thinking about theorizing a racial identity of Arabs, right? That we are white adjacent, we are probationary white, we're eligible for whiteness. There has to be always a constant and a never-ending commitment to Black liberation in all its forms. And so we are always in debt. And that work happens not merely in, you know, thinking about Palestine, but that work happens in labor, that work happens in education, that work happens in abolition, that work happens, you know, in employment. That's where that commitment is, and that lies. So I will never say that, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the tally is, but I'll tell you for sure, whatever it is, we're in debt. We're always in debt. That's what solidarity is.
But let me ask you about that, because I think
the second part, but go ahead.
Just, I don't want you to forget your second part, but I just want to ask you about that first part, because I guess I think you're right to some extent that the radical base of our respective communities and movements probably have not wavered nearly as much as the online and public discord would suggest.
We're the people who were never on board, really. Do you know what I mean? And there were a lot of people not on board. There were a lot of people who continued to be anti-Black, and there were a lot of people who continued to understand Palestinians as terrorists.
For sure. I guess what I wonder, though, is, does this particular moment of tension undermine the capacity, our capacity to build or expand that movement, if people walk away from this election cycle or this political moment more broadly saying, we would have gotten our needs met if Palestine hadn't been an interruption, or, you know, we would have been able to apply pressure to the anti-genocide movement if people hadn't sold us out in favor of a neoliberal corporate imperial cop, just for example. So how I think you're right that the roots of our movements haven't been shaken, but have we compromised our ability to build on top of that?
So, okay, and that gets to the second question, right? Because I think what happens in this is, you know, to equate basically the future of Black Palestine solidarity to how people decide what to do in this particular election. And what I'm trying to do is to disentangle those things and to say, you know, I think we can evaluate them separately. Obviously, they're going to relate to one another. But to start by saying that I really would, you know, just want to emphasize that this has always been, you know, this is not identity politics. This has been an anti-imperial commitment. All right. This is a vision for a shared future. where, you know, Black radicals who believe that there is no true freedom so long as the US remains empire abroad, and Palestinians who are equally committed to that vision, right? And we saw that. We saw that, for example, in Durham, North Carolina, where there was the only successful campaign to abolish Durham Police Department training in Israel, right? And these are things where you're attacking imperialism locally, and the shared struggle is explicitly shared when you have, you know, these shared targets. Okay. The second question that you're asking is a very, very, very complicated one about the elections and how it's been framed and how it's going to continue to be framed, right? And so one thing I just want to start from a place of frankly wanting to be nuanced and wanting to be complicated about this, that two things can be true at the same time, right? Two things can be true at the same time. This democratic establishment is participating and forwarding a genocide. It is overseeing everything that we're seeing right now is being done under this democratic regime, this democratic administration, right? And so this is not some hypothetical thing that's happening. And what's been, you know, and this isn't even about Kamala being at the top of the ticket, because even if it was Biden, the fact that I think most people are upset that there's not a concerted opposition to Trump and what Trump will mean for everybody in the United States. So I want to also displace the fact that, yes, Kamala at the top of the ticket is making this much more complicated because of the excitement about, you know, having a Black woman in the highest rank in this racist, you know, racial settler colony is. But let's just get it, you know, to the point that we can actually talk about, which is, I think most people are, why are we not getting into line to oppose Trump? So here, two things can be true: that there is a harm that Trump poses, even if there's no daylight between between Trump and Kamala or Biden on Palestine. Frankly, there's no daylight between them if we evaluate it. Even though the numbers of dead will likely be more under Trump, the policies themselves haven't changed. If you want, I'll enumerate them, whether it's moving the embassy, defunding UNRWA, whether it's the continuing the Abraham Accords, whether it's, you know, Trump pulled out of the Iran rapprochement agreement in the Middle East, and Biden has never re-entered into it, right? There is no daylight. They are pursuing the same policy, right? This is going to be a matter of numbers different. But will Trump have a significant impact on the United States? Yeah. And that's real. And that's why two things can be true at the same time. And so the way that I come at this is really to tell, you know, you just can't tell Palestinians to vote for their genocide. You just can't tell Palestinians to vote for their genocide. And for folks, we just keep missing opportunities. There was an opportunity for those who wanted to defeat Trump and oppose genocide. There was an opportunity to withhold the enthusiastic endorsements for Kamala when she was announced. The wave of endorsements that came in without pause, without a second, except for Rashida Tlaib, that could have withheld that endorsement and said, you can have it, but, right? It was this lack of even, you know, trying to do that work. And so this is where the anger is coming. And at this point, you really can't ask Palestinians to vote for their genocide, but you can ask you can continue to ask to have the administration that you want in office to end a genocide. And the thing to also remember is this is not about solidarity, Mark. This is about accountability. Even racialized minorities in the heart of empire, the United States, are beneficiaries of empire. Even those of us who live really poorly or really well, we all are beneficiaries of empire.
Right.
The amount of food that we have, the amount of comfort that we have, the choice of education that we have, the amount of jobs that we can have is all predicated on the extraction and the exploitation of other countries, of other resources, of hoarding of wealth. We were the first to be vaccinated against COVID and to have access to vaccines. If that makes sense for people, if that's the closest way to understand, we have an unaccounted privilege by living in the heart of empire. So this is not about solidarity. This is about responsibility. And so there has to be a commitment to that. At the same time, I want to just, I see very clearly and see very much that I'm not, I don't think it's okay to just say that there's no way that any, that you just want to punish the Dems, but that means that you are gonna, do so. You have to do something. There has to be a plan besides punishment. There has to be a play. What is the strategic play? It's the elections are not the beginning and the end. So what is the strategic play? Are we building the coalition to protect one another in the aftermath of this? Are we trying to, to accelerate a defeat of the Democrats in order to accelerate the dismantlement of empire? What is the play? And I just think that we just need to ask more questions. We're not even getting there because we're stopping in the shallow, we're in the edges. And so, what's the plan? And so far there isn't a plan, which is why
I haven't seen a plan. And
people keep asking, people like me, I'm like, why are you asking me? I don't work in a C4. I'm not a policy expert. Like, I'm out here, and I usually vote, independent. And this isn't my field and my expertise. So I'm not the one to come up with the plan, but I can probably ask some questions about things that we need to ask. I also want to point out to people that whether or not Trump comes into power, right? Whoever wins this election, right? No matter how you vote, it's not ending genocide. Neither voting right now, nobody that you vote for is going to secure the end of genocide. That's heartbreaking. And so that's why we have to also decenter the significance of this in this conversation. If that's not forthcoming, then the other thing that we know is it's not going to defeat white supremacists. They don't go away. They're still arming themselves right now. How are we preparing for this? We're still existing in fascism exists for many of us in this society. Some people live free. Other people don't live free. Black and brown people know that. This is a fascist society for many. And so that doesn't go away. Or we were talking about this, Mark. Trump doesn't have to win for 234 of his judicial appointees to still have power, for there to be a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. Affirmative action has been gutted. Abortion has been gutted. EPA regulation has been gutted, right? He can lose, and that 6-3 majority is in place. So what is the play? What is the play? What are we doing? What are we doing in regards to empire? What are we doing in regards to this society? And we get really intense and we want to talk about it every 4 years, but what are we doing? And so I don't know. I'm really sad by this conversation. I'm mostly sad. I wish there was an answer. I wish there was clarity here. The thing that I would really, really, advise people to do is to exercise more nuance, right? To exercise more nuance, to call a spade. Kamala's speech was Harris's speech was awful. Was awful. That's just is what it is. It was awful. She wants a lethal fighting force. That's basically saying we want U.S. to remain empire.
Yeah.
Call it out.
Right.
POC lied on the stage. I mean, just call these things out. Two things can be true at once.